Alrighty then, guys. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the top 5 questions that I have used personally and that I teach my clients that have helped myself and my clients close millions and millions and millions of dollars in the high ticket sales space and industry. What I'm about to teach you and what I'm about to talk about is coming from 5 years experience, nearly 6 by the end of this year in the high ticket sales industry. And if you're looking to get into this space or you're just beginning this space, trust me, there's a lot of complexity in the market right now. Everyone's saying you have to do this, you have to do that, and everyone's got their own opinion, which is totally fine. But when you're first starting out, my recommendation is that you master the basics and you get good at the foundations. It may be lucrative and it may be exciting to try the newest objection handle, reframe, analogy, identity label, all this fancy bullshit, basically. But what I'm here to tell you and what I'm here to give you today is the foundations and the basics of what just works that is going to enable you to get from 0 to 10K a month. And you're either a beginner watching this, you've kind of got your feet wet in the industry, or you're looking and you're exploring getting into high ticket sales. Trust me, there's going to be a lot of value in this video for you today as I explain to you the basics of what has worked for me and what has enabled 37 plus of my clients. I would say by next month or the month after, 42 to 43 of my clients to go from complete scratch beginner, not knowing anything about sales, to 10K a month in the last 2 years. So if that's enough context for you, if that's got you interested, let's dive straight into the meat of it and let's be direct and go straight into the questions. Okay, so the first thing we're going to start with is less of a question, but more of a correction. And it's to do with how to set a frame properly for the call. If you've never heard of what that is and you don't know what that is, don't worry, I'm going to give you the context and we're going to be talking about the bad and the don'ts, and we're going to be talking about the do's. I'm going to give you a language pattern or a word track that I use. I've been taught by mentors and I've taught my clients that has been quite successful and it works really, really well. So if you're new to the space, you likely haven't heard of what setting a frame is. Or if you're a beginner, you might have heard drifts and drafts of it. I want to give the full context of what I believe that to be in a sales call and how it serves its purpose. So setting a frame in a sales call is more or less basically just giving the prospect clarity on the direction of where the call is heading, so they don't ask you questions later on in the dialogue of where is this going? Why are you asking me all these questions? Can you just tell me what you do, right? Because without that context, the prospect is kind of confused. They're coming on and talking to a complete random stranger on the internet, and all they wanted to do was learn about trading, but now you're asking them a million questions about their life, their personal goals, and so on and so forth. So I think it's important to give the prospect clarity and context of how the sales call is going to go and what is going to happen and so on and so forth. But I think it's also important in the first 30 to 60 seconds of the call to establish authority and frame. Not in a douchey way, not in a I'm better than you way, not in a superiority way, but in a way that a person will buy from you if they trust you and they believe that you are the trusted authority for what it is that you're selling, right? If you are the trusted expert, they will buy from you. So if you set a frame correctly, without being pushy, without trying to close someone, which I'm going to point out how people do that here in a second, you're going to do really well. So what are the don'ts with how to set a frame? A lot of mistakes I see with beginners is they think that by telling a prospect that they have to say yes or no, not a maybe or a think about it, means that they're not going to tell them that they want to think about it or they need to speak to their partner, so on and so forth. If you tell a prospect that this is the way things are going to go and that you have to give me an answer by the end of the call, it creates sales resistance and unnecessary sales pressure that didn't exist before. So just don't do it, right? I hear in a lot of beginners sales calls of, hey, by the end of the call today, like you have to tell me yes or no. Let's just be real with each other, right? That doesn't mean anything, to be frank with you. And the prospect is just going to throw out every objection manageable. And what's going to happen is when you do that so earlier on, you're going to find very more often than not that the prospect actually shuts down and closes off and gives you not very good quality answers, which not very good quality answers and not a very good discovery leads to objections later and leads to no sales. So you don't want to be putting in your frame that someone ultimately has to make a decision at the end of the call, because it puts sales pressure and unnecessary sales resistance. So just don't do it. Another thing that I see beginners make a mistake with is they make it very structured and come off as like they're using a strategy against the prospect. Don't do that, right? Hey, at the end of the call, if we're not a fit, like, I'm going to point you the best direction. While that's a little bit better and it's a little bit more neutral and it's a little bit more passive, it's not as aggressive and it's not as sales pressury, it's still, in my mind, not as natural and not as flowy as a natural conversation will go. If the prospect believes that you're asking them questions out of a process, they will shut down and they will not give you the answers that you need to make the sales that you want. So ultimately, you want it to come off as natural as possible. So let's go through exactly how I would set a frame and the language that I use that is neutral, but also gives the prospect a expectation and clarity around where the call and conversation is going, and also sets the frame correctly to where we have a level of status and a level of authority in the very first 30 seconds of the call. So typically I might say something like this, and I learned this from a mentor, so I didn't create it myself, but it worked extremely well for me. Now, really the first part of this call is really more for us together to find out a little bit more about your background. So what you've tried in the past, kind of what you're doing now, and then really like what I would say is ultimately what you're looking for, just to make sure we can even help you in the first place, because sometimes, well, there are just some certain people, there's not much we can really do for them. You know what I mean by that, right? Right. Let's unpack that and explain to you why it works. So the word now acts as if the phrase is just pulled out of your mind. You're saying it for the first time. So it comes through more natural and conversational, like I spoke about before. And just more natural, more easier. And you'll notice how the way that I said the frame was very natural, very conversational. And it seems like I'm saying it for the first time. Even though I know exactly what I'm saying and I have a strategy behind it, and I've said it thousands of times, I always act like I've said it for the first time, as it comes across more conversational, more natural, and thus gets better answers from my prospects and they don't shut down. In the first couple sentences, I talked about, finding about their background, their past, what they've tried. These are all reasonable things. And so these are the questions that my dialogue is going to go down. So they have very clear context of where the conversation is going. And then I didn't say like if we're a fit or not. I very naturally implied the idea of the fact that there are some people that we can't help. But it wasn't obvious and it wasn't direct and it wasn't implicit. It was very subcommunicated. It was very natural. And the prospect in their mind thinks, maybe I'm not going to get sold today, and maybe I may not be a fit for this program. So they'll actually a lot of times end up trying to sell you and be giving better thought and depth and quality to their answers, because they think that they are also being somewhat interviewed for the program that you're selling, which very helps you from a status and authority point of view. That's pretty much the frame and what I use and how I frame calls correctly. So hopefully that helps. So the next question that I like to use in my sales calls, and I teach my clients and it's worked successfully for me, is what are they currently doing to solve their current problem? Now, this might be a very simple question and it might seem very basic, but trust me, it's very important to the sales process. How we sell someone is creating a gap. And ultimately what you're doing in sales is change. You're getting a prospect to go from their current situation to their desired situation. And the further gap they have in their mind, the more they'll pay for the solution and the more urgency they'll have to act on what it is that you sell. Instead of you pressuring them to buying something, they're creating the urgency themselves. We'll tap on that a little bit later on when we talk about cost of an action and why that's so important. But the question very simply is, what are you currently doing to solve XYZ problem? So for example, if someone wants to make more money, what do you currently do for a living? What do you do for work, right? That's the current way of method they are using to solve the problem that they are trying to solve and the solution they're looking for. Let's say, for example, the business wants to generate more leads and get more customers and clients. Okay, so what are you guys currently doing right now to generate more leads, more clients, and get more customers? right? Let's say, for example, it's a coaching program helping men get more dates or find their dream girl. You could say, okay, so what are you currently doing right now that is helping you get more dates? Or what are you currently doing right now to actually find this dream partner that you just described to me, right? What this does is, even though you may know what they're currently doing and they may have said that in the application form, you want the prospect to anchor in their mind personally where they're currently at, because we're going to be future pacing later on in the call of where they want to go, thus creating the gap that will want them to buy. We'll create the gap that will want them, that will get them to create the urgency for them to move and change, like I said earlier before. So the more vivid image that the prospect has in their mind of their current situation and where they're at and what they're currently doing, the better. Because the stronger the image, the stronger the visualization, the stronger awareness of where they're currently at and where they want to be, the gap between that, again, the more likeliness someone's going to buy, because they actually want to buy what it is that you have. If someone doesn't really have urgency and they don't really care, they're not going to buy at the end of the day. So it's very important that we paint the image from the get-go of what they're currently doing to solve the problem, so that we can create the gap later on. So the next question I'm going to walk you guys through is called the done for you objection prevention question. Now, a lot of times, even if you get the discovery correct, you paint the prospect's current situation, you find out where they want to go, you find out their ideal solution, which we'll talk about here in a second. They have urgency, they want to move, they want to work with you. And then at the end of the call, they hit you with, it sounds amazing, but I really would just like to try this on my own, right? This could be for fitness, for example, or a fitness coach. It sounds fantastic. I really love what you guys have going on here, but I think if I just became more accountable to myself, I had my own accountability, I got an in-person PT, and I started eating right, I probably would get to where I want to go. And that is why, my friends, you need to ask the done for you objection prevention question. It's very, very, very important. And if you miss it, you can hear this a lot towards the end of your calls, because the prospect still thinks that their current way of doing things, or the resources they have access to currently as present, is actually going to help them solve their problem, actually going to get to where they want to go. We need the prospect to understand that that's absolutely not the case. So let's talk about the question that I've been talking about, the DIY objection prevention question. So it goes something a little bit like this. So I guess I was curious, besides wanting to make more money, because that's what all of our clients look to do, what's really the main reason why you're possibly looking for some ways to streamline this process, make it faster, get a better system, get some outside help, and streamline the process, as opposed to maybe just trying to figure it out the way you've always been doing it, or try and just figure it out on your own. Let's unpack why this actually works so well. So the reason why is because we're getting the prospect, we're not telling the prospect, but we're getting the prospect to tell us, but more importantly themselves, as to why their current way of doing things is not currently working, and that they can't figure it out on their own. We're getting them to sell themselves and tell themselves as to why that is. A big mistake I see a lot of new closers and beginners do is they try to tell them that the way they're currently doing isn't going to get them where they want to go. They try to convince, they try to persuade, they try to argue and debate as to why their current way of process is not great. A key quote you want to remember in sales, it's very, very important, that a mentor taught me, which is that a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. It's from Dale Carnegie. I think his book from How to Win Friends and Influence People, as well as another mentor of mine, he said and taught me, which was that what a prospect says is gospel and what you say is trash. Doesn't matter, right? You need to ask the right questions to get the prospect to convince them why they need to change, as opposed to the other way around. This question does just that, and it really X's off any alternate pathway or way of getting the result on their own or with their current process, right? Again, gets them to doubt their current way of doing things, because they'll tell you, well, I can't get there with the way I've been doing it, because I've been trying the last 3 years to make money online and it just hasn't worked. So this is a very, very powerful question. Make sure that you put it in the middle of your sales process. That's where it works best. And of course, make it conversational, because if it's very, hey, why work with us? It's not going to work very well. So the languaging that you use is very important. So take the word track from the video, use it for yourself, and hopefully you can make some more sales with it. Okay, so the next question that's really important to the foundations of your sales process is the ideal criteria question, ideal solution question. Really, basically, what does a prospect actually want in a solution? Now, let me explain to you why this is important, and then I'll give you an example of how I use it in my sales calls and how my clients use it in their sales calls. So, most new beginner sales reps go really, really wrong by just wanting to shove the product that they're selling down the prospect's throat. They want them to buy or die. They just want to tell them about all their amazing features and benefits as to why what they're selling is the best compared to all their competitors. This is a very wrong way and a very bad approach of going about doing it. The best salespeople gain very clear clarity around what it is a prospect actually wants. And that way, when we present our solution, we can highlight and specify the points that they mentioned were important to them. So it means that our solution and our presentation seems a lot more custom tailored to the prospect. It's a lot more desirable, and they hear what they want to hear, right? Your product and your solution may do 100 million things. Doesn't really matter. As long as the prospect trusts that you are the best person to get them from point A to point B, they're going to buy from you, right? So in order to do that, you need to gain clarity around exactly what it is that they want. You need to ask what they want in a solution. So we're going to go through exactly how to do that just now. So let's go through word for word exactly how I teach my clients to do this. And again, I didn't create this question. I learned it from mentors, just to give you the context. I'm not a genius, but I didn't invent sales, but this is just what's worked for me and what I've learned from mentors. So it goes a little bit like this. So let's do this just to make sure that what we're doing actually will tick the boxes for you and actually work for you for what you're looking for. What would you be looking for in some possible outside help with this to streamline the process and actually get the results you're looking for? Like, what would be, not really sure the word, maybe like your ideal criteria, do you think, right? Now, this question is really going to give you everything that you need when it comes to what the prospect's looking for in a solution. You can ask, once they say maybe like they're looking for community or training, more support, more help, you can ask why that's important to them. You can ask, is there any further things that they think is important in a solution, to really gather and expand more data and more clarity on what is exactly that they want. Because again, the more clear a picture you get, the better you're going to present your solution. And again, the higher likeliness chance that your prospect is going to buy from you. So the better you get at this, the better you get at presenting the solution, as well as being able to communicate it the right way for what the prospect wants, you're ultimately going to make more sales. So hopefully this helps. Last but not least, one of the most important questions in your discovery is going to be a cost of inaction question, otherwise known as a consequence question. Now, this question is present in many sales philosophies for the very simple reason as it's probably one of the most important questions in your discovery and your overall sales process. You can get everything right. You can find what they want in an ideal solution. You can find out the problem, what's going on. You can find out their current situation. You can stretch the gap. You can find the goals. You can find the pain. But ultimately, if you do not get the consequence of an action, you do not create internal urgency, the prospect will not move. You'll hear answers like, well, it all sounds good, but I have to think about it. Or it all sounds good, I have to talk to my partner. It all sounds good, but let's do it in 3 months. If there is no internal urgency in the prospect, they will not move and they will not change, right? As I said earlier before, that's what sales is. It is change, going from their current situation to their desired situation. And ultimately, humans do not like to change. They do not like change. They are very beings who like simplicity. They like comfort, right? We are wired to like comfort. So in order to get the prospect to move, as I've said a million times now, we get them to develop internal urgency, which is what consequence questions or cost of an action questions do. Now, I just want to clarify before we go through the demonstration of a consequence question, the difference between internal and external urgency and why consequence questions develop internal urgency, and while external urgency isn't as valuable. Remember the quote that we spoke about a little bit earlier before to do with a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. The same principle applies here, which is that a lot of beginner salespeople and new salespeople to high ticket sales industry will use certain external urgency uh, to kind of fluff up the prospect and get them to move. For example, hey, because I think you're special, usually we sell this for $15,000, but I like you, so we're going to give it to you for five. Or we have a fast action bonus and we have a fast action take a discount. While these can work, and for some prospects, some industries, they're somewhat effective, but in the general use case, I would advise against using them. I've used them in the past. I don't enjoy them. They're fake. They're not real. And the moment a prospect calls you out on it, you're cooked. You're not in a very good position. So the best way to create urgency with a prospect is not to give false urgency, like there's only 2 spots left, or you get a fast action bonus discount or whatever it is. These can work, but the best way to create urgency and get someone to move is consequence questions, which is what I'm going to run you through now. So consequence questions address what it is exactly that's going to happen if the prospect does not change their current situation, doesn't get the help, doesn't get the support that they need so they can actually get to where it is that they want to go and the goals that they've told you through the entirety of the discovery. The questions go as something a little bit like this. So a simple one that you can use is, what's going to happen if you don't do anything about this and nothing changes and you don't get to where you want to go and you stay in the same situation? Very simple, very basic consequence question. You can experiment and you can change different variables of the question because, again, it is just a question and it is a principle. So you can start experimenting with different things that are going to work for you. You can put in timelines. You can put in emotional, logical tangibles. I'm going to give you an example of what I mean by that now. So I'm going to give you a quick example of plugging in emotional, logical tangibles and timelines in different scenarios. So a basic consequence question with timelines could look something like this. So John, what's actually going to end up happening if you don't change and you keep in this endless cycle and loop of working your 9 to 5, never find another solution of making money online, and you just keep doing what you've been doing for the next 3, 6, 12 months? You can even change up different timelines of 3, 6, 7 years, right? Whatever you want to do to kind of change it up and experiment with different timelines and ultimately just find what best works for you. And also best works for different prospects because some different prospects can need to hear different things based off your discovery and what you found out during your previous exploration discovery process. If you want more of a serious one, a more detail-oriented one that's going to hit more harder, you can plug in the timelines as well as emotional and logical tangibles. For example, John, what's actually going to happen if you don't change, you stay in the same situation, you stay in this same endless loop where you don't get your energy back, you feel lethargic all the time, you can't spend the time that you want with your kids, and you actually don't show up as the husband, the leader, the father that you've always wanted to be. And this goes on for not just the next 6 to 12 months, but 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right? As you can see, there's different contrasting difference. You can kind of compare the different questions and ultimately find what works best for you. But this question is very, 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 very key. You need to make sure the prospect actually admits a cost of an action to you. Otherwise, if they give you answers, fluffy answers, like for example, well, I don't think that's going to happen, or that's just not going to happen, the prospect is avoiding conflict. They're avoiding looking at the ugly side of things. So it's very important that you hold them down and you get the cost of an action. Otherwise, we are very much having a high likely chance of an objection at the end of the call because we don't have any consequence of an action and they don't know why internally they have to move. And if you're trying to tell them they have to move, like we said earlier before, they simply just won't. So try this question in your sales calls and hopefully it helps. So guys, that is it. Hopefully you can use these questions to make more money in your sales calls. Hopefully you have a better foundational understanding of why we use them and how they work. At the end of the day, that's all my goal is. I'm not here to be a fancy top of the range sales trainer that's going to take you to $1 million a year. My main goal is helping beginners go from that 0 to 10 mark. And hopefully these questions in this video aided you and supported you in getting there a whole lot faster. So if you found this helpful, make sure to like the video. I'll make more educational sales videos like this, as I don't do them very often. So hopefully you got the value. Hopefully you enjoyed. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.